But I think now it's really taken this story and turned it into something that, while there were a lot of folks that felt strongly before about it, now folks are hearing, oh, somebody could be taking maybe not a chainsaw, but a welding torch or something. They could literally be cutting this prized piece of American history into a bunch of pieces in the next few months, over the next year. Because again, remember, there's that January 2027 deadline. So this is something that wouldn't be that far away, one way or another. And I think it's created that added urgency where folks are a lot more alarmed than they were before.
So here I am, minding my own business on my honeymoon in Istanbul, but I'm thinking about Texas. It's on my mind because there's a really crazy thing that's going on, this idea to relocate Space Shuttle Discovery from the Smithsonian, where it's been for quite a while now, to Texas, and it actually looks like it's making progress. So this is something that, I feel like is somewhat controversial. I think most people are on the side of just leave it at the Smithsonian where it's been, but it looks like it's, might actually potentially go to Texas. Not only that, they would have to disassemble the Space Shuttle Discovery, a very delicate artifact from our space industry. So I wanted to interview someone who's desperately trying to save this and also get your thoughts.
I grew up in the DC area, huge aerospace enthusiast, grew up during, I guess, what you'd call the second half of the shuttle era. Dragged my parents down to the Air and Space Museum, first downtown, and then the Udvar-Hazy Annex when it opened. I, grew up, didn't end up working in the aerospace industry at all. I work in a totally different field, but remain a huge aerospace buff. My wife is as well. And we actually got married at Udvar-Hazy at Discovery's nose last year.
Oh my
so
God.
it's a very special place for me, for us, of course. But I think that's the case for a lot of folks. It's hard to walk in there and not be blown away with
Yeah.
Discovery and the full collection that they have. When I heard that this proposal had been put forth to take Discovery, move her to Houston, I knew that, certainly I was opposed to it, but I knew that I wasn't going to be the only one, that there were going to be a lot of folks that were concerned, not just about moving the shuttle, but also just the general trend, the precedent that would be set where, a couple elected officials could take something out of the Smithsonian, out of the national collection, and move it for some political points. And while I don't have any prior experience in politics or anything like that, I figured I could find some folks that were like-minded and make some noise. And that's what I've been doing for the last few months.
Wow. Well, now you're really stepping up to the plate. I mean, when I first heard about this, I thought it sounded kind of crazy. I guess I still don't really know what would be the point. So tell me when you first heard rumblings of this and sort of where we're at right now.
This really started in the spring. I believe it was back in April when Senators Cornyn and Cruz, both from Texas, they introduced a piece of standalone legislation that would basically do the same thing that's being discussed now, take Discovery and send her to Houston. That bill failed to progress, didn't go anywhere. It died in committee. And so when the Big Beautiful Bill Act, which is a huge piece of legislation that covers a lot of different things, had nothing to do with the space shuttle, of course, but as it was approaching its passage back in late June, early July, they added a provision to it at the last minute that said, hey, we're going to take a spacecraft, which everyone understood to be Discovery, and we were going to relocate it to a location which was understood to be Houston. And so that's what really set the current story in motion.
Right. And it looks like, I mean, I saw an article from just a few days ago that, it's sort of moving forward. It seems that way.
Yes. So the provision in the Big Beautiful Bill Act gives the relocation 18 months to happen. So January of 2027. What we found out recently was that the White House Budget Office has been asking the Smithsonian and NASA to work together to facilitate the transfer. And it isn't quite a done deal yet, right? There's still, for example, the 85 million that was authorized by that big, beautiful bill. It actually hasn't been appropriated by Congress. So that's one thing that we're pushing back on. That's certainly one very real avenue to, ultimately cancel the relocation to prevent it. But at any rate, the budget office asked those two organizations to, basically to start making this happen and to make it happen as quickly as possible. And what we found out from that letter that the Smithsonian sent to Congress, and then we got a hold of, and the media has covered quite a bit, what we found out from that letter was NASA and the Smithsonian have come to a joint conclusion that the most likely path to move Discovery to Houston would be to disassemble the orbiter, basically tear it up into a bunch of pieces, and then ship those pieces off to Houston. There's, of course, a multitude of issues, with that plan. But that's kind of the latest. That's where we are right now.
Yeah, let's talk about some of the reasons why you and I think a lot of other people are so against this. I mean, number one, this wasn't really meant to be disassembled, right? And also, from what I understand, it'll probably cost a lot more than what's being projected. So I guess maybe if you just want to go personally, what is some of your, why are you so, I don't know, passionate about this?
When I started getting allies together, of course, our first focus was on keeping Discovery at the Smithsonian. The fact of the matter is that, there was a process 15 years ago where the shuttle was allocated there. It was a fair process set up, run by NASA at the time. There was not, despite some allegations that have been made by some folks, there was not a political angle to it. NASA's Inspector General reviewed it afterwards. And the Smithsonian has been taking good care of Discovery since then. I think it's very difficult to tell the story of American spaceflight, of American aerospace history, without including the shuttle, without including Discovery in particular, which time and time again was really at the centerpiece of the program between launching the Hubble Space Telescope, both return to flight missions, and ultimately spending a full 365 days in space. Discovery really was the flagship. And the Smithsonian is the nation's premier aerospace institution that serves the whole country and really the whole world. That is the proper space, the proper location for Discovery. So there's that angle, but then of course now we have this new twist where the shuttle could be disassembled, and that's its own that's its own severe problem. There's a few things. As you said, NASA never intended for the shuttles to be disassembled and taken apart. It's not something they were designed for. From the conversations that we've had from engineers, from NASA alumni, from the letter from the Smithsonian itself, which had those insights from NASA and the Smithsonian together, we know that if one were to attempt to tear the shuttle apart, you would do significant irreparable damage to multiple components, including some of the most prominent features of the spacecraft. The black tiles that are on the belly, those are extremely fragile. You could literally put your finger through one with just a light poke. But there's about 22,000 or so of them on Discovery. 17,000 are actually fully original. They flew all 39 missions in space.
Wow.
And to disassemble, that was just something I learned very recently from a conversation with a program alum. I had no idea that there were that many that were original. But to cut the shuttle up, you would have to remove thousands of them. You would destroy most of them in the process, even if you were as careful as possible. The number that was quoted by me by an expert was you're only going to maybe save 10% of them if you're super careful. So you're going to destroy all these original components, and you're not going to be able to replace them. And there's other components as well. There's the white thermal blankets that cover a lot of the rest of the shuttle. It's actually a fabric. A lot of folks don't know that. And then there's also just the fact that they specifically preserve Discovery so that future engineers, future researchers could go inside the craft, look around, learn things, which they do regularly for other spacecraft. As one person told me, they still go back and look at Apollo spacecraft from time to learn how NASA did things in the 60s. And if you chop up the shuttle, you're not going to be able to put it back together in the same way. And a
Right.
lot of that historical preservation value is going to be lost.
For sure. Well, I have to say, even though I'm a full-time space journalist, the one perk of being self-employed is that I can share my opinion, and I'm totally on the opinion of you guys. And I agree. Like, this is the whole thing is so ridiculous to me. And when I kind of first heard about it too a couple months ago, and then it seemed like it died down. And so I think what shocks me about it the most now is, like, you have the interim NASA leader Duffy who's saying let's do it, and it scares me that it might actually happen. And so like, what can people do right now? And also, why do you think that Ted Cruz and others really want this? What is their sort of logic? It seems like a big waste of taxpayer money. It's just like, why now?
Sure. So maybe to address a few things. First off, we're welcoming anyone that wants to get involved. Our website's keeptheshuttle.org. You can sign up there to receive further updates from our team. But the thing that's really important on the website is we have links where you can find contact information for all of your elected officials, your congressmen, your senators, even folks at the local and state level, especially for folks that live in Texas or live in Virginia, and have a little bit more of that proximity to the story. But there's that information that's available. And we also have sample scripts, sample letters, call scripts that folks can use if they want when they call or write in to register their opposition. And in fact, I actually updated those just a few days ago once we found out about the proposal where the shuttle could get cut up, because I think that really is a visceral part of the story that a lot of folks identify with even more. So we're welcoming folks' involvement. What we're doing in terms of pushing back is a few angles. One, I think I mentioned before, that 85 million, which I completely agree would be a tremendous waste of taxpayer dollars. But fortunately, Congress hasn't appropriated it yet. It is possible that it will be part of the new 2026 budget, which of course is a much larger story than the space shuttle at the moment, with the government shutdown and all of that. But it's something where we and some of our allies in Congress are actively pushing back, encouraging the relevant appropriations committees on the House side, on the Senate side, to not include it when that budget is eventually finalized. So that's, of course, a big angle. There's a few others, though. One other example is we had originally thought, before the disassembly story came about, we had thought that the most likely path to get Discovery to Houston would be largely by barge. You would take the shuttle to the Potomac River and then float her all the way down around Florida through the Gulf into Houston. But that would actually start with a 25-mile plus tow through Northern Virginia, particularly Fairfax County. And we know from the 12-mile move of Endeavour through LA about 15 years ago that was a tremendously complex and disruptive occasion. Obviously, it was worth it for LA. They were getting a space shuttle, but Fairfax County fortunately agrees with us that they have a different opinion of that kind of work when you're losing a shuttle. So there's multiple ways we are able to push back on this, and we're going to keep doing that.
Do you feel you've made any progress, and how long have you had this effort sort of going?
I think there's definitely been progress. I launched the website right around the July 4th holiday, so right as the Big Beautiful Bill Act was being signed. That was when I launched the website, started doing outreach, contacting folks. And I think we've made progress. We partnered with Fairfax County to release a public statement, and they sent a letter to Acting Administrator Duffy opposing the move. So that was about a month ago, and that was a real win, especially on the logistics side. But then we also have a sizable roster of folks in Congress that we've been in discussions with, and our allies have been connecting with, really pushing back on that funding and on the broader relocation. That's why you saw that story about a week or so ago, before the carving up story came out. There was a letter from 4 senators, including Senator Kelly, who flew on Discovery twice. But those are some of the elected officials that have already been pushing back from the federal side.
And so, since you're more of an expert on this, like why are they pushing for this now? Why do they think that they sort of deserve this? Why is, this just seems so silly to me.
I agree. What I think it comes back to is 15 or so years ago, there were only 4 shuttles, including Enterprise, which never flew in space, but there were 4 shuttles to go around, and there was a fierce competition for them. There were a lot of museums that wanted to get involved. The Air Force Museum in Ohio was another top contender that didn't get one. Houston was certainly at the top of the list in terms of folks that might have got one but didn't. And I suppose there were still some hurt feelings, and Senators Cornyn and Cruz, they saw an angle to correct what they think is a wrong. But again, NASA had an entire process where they went through, they evaluated multiple sites. I think it was in the dozens in terms of number of museums that expressed interest in getting one of the retired shuttles. And they ultimately felt that Florida, California, New York, and the Smithsonian were the 4 best homes for the orbiters. And, there's one thing that they just put out a letter yesterday or 2 days ago, basically punching back on some of the statements that we and some of our allies have been making. And, one thing that they pointed out was that, in the original draft of cities and museums that would have received a shuttle, Houston was on the list. And that is probably true. But it's also true that the Smithsonian was always on the list. They were on that first list that they referenced. They were obviously on the final list. I think there was a real recognition by NASA that the Smithsonian is the premier aerospace museum. It's meant to serve the country. It's not meant to serve Washington, D.C. or Virginia. It's not meant to serve Texas or California or any other state. It's meant to serve the country as a whole. And that was why the Smithsonian was always included on the list of shuttle recipients, and why it should keep Discovery. It should keep the one that they have.
And so how likely, do you think that this will actually end up happening? What do you think are the chances right now?
Sure. It's it's hard to handicap a percentage. But what I think is happening, especially now that there is this new twist to the story where the shuttle could get carved into pieces. I think that's taken the debate from something that before was, a little wonky, a little bit of a political DC story where, we were talking about proposals from 15 years ago and budget appropriations, and is the Smithsonian a federal entity or is it not? It was kind of a nerdy conversation for a bit. But I think now it's really taken this story and turned it into something that, while there were a lot of folks that felt strongly before about it, now folks are hearing, somebody could be taking maybe not a chainsaw, but a welding torch or something. They could literally be cutting this prized piece of American history into a bunch of pieces in the next few months, over the next year. Because again, remember, there's that January 2027 deadline. So this is something that wouldn't be that far away, one way or another. And I think it's created that added urgency where folks are a lot more alarmed than they were before. So it's hard to really handicap a percentage because, again, there's a bunch of different ways where we and our allies could block the relocation. There's a lot of moving parts going on in Congress and in other sectors right now, but we feel pretty good about our chances to keep Discovery where she is.
Did you ever think that this was going to be something that you'd have to add to your resume, that you'd have to, fight for and put all this effort and become an expert on? It's quite noble. I appreciate you doing it, but like how random, right?
Completely agree. It definitely wasn't until certainly this summer, maybe back in the spring, I never considered the possibility that that this is a story that could happen in any form, let alone one that I would be getting involved with. I remember when we were planning our wedding and had the wedding and looking at pictures afterwards, I remember thinking, oh, this will be really cool in the future, in 10, 20, 30 years, we'll be able to take our kids there one day and show them, hey, this is where we got married, stuff like that. We'll be able to take them around the museum, show them all the artifacts there. And unfortunately, there's now a real risk to that future. There's a real risk for the millions of people that come and visit Udvar Hazy, that come and visit the downtown museum each year, where one of the core parts of the museum could be lost. And I think I mentioned at the outset of our conversation, there's this real risk where not only could a shuttle be lost, but if we set this precedent, it could keep going, and not just at Air and Space, but across the broader museum. You could see New York coming and saying, hey, the Hope Diamond that the Smithsonian has, we want to take that back. You could see Kansas come in and say, hey, Dorothy's ruby slippers that are in American history, we want to take those back to Kansas. And I say that a little bit in jest, but it really is a real risk that if this goes forward, any elected official from a blue state, from a red state, it doesn't matter, either party, could be able to, if they find themselves, say, in a tight re-election race or something like that, they may start looking at the Smithsonian as an opportunity to a place that they could raid and get a few political points back home. I really think this is a bipartisan story at the end of the day. And I think that comes down to, there's two examples that have given me some conviction with that. One is, like I mentioned before, that original standalone legislation to move the shuttle, it didn't go anywhere. It died in committee. There were no Democrats signed up for it, and no additional Republicans did either. It was a meeting of one of the appropriations committees, the House committee that specifically covers the budget for the Smithsonian. This was about 2 months ago. It was not too long after the Big Beautiful Bill Act was signed and the story was starting to pick up. But there was a representative from New York. He's a Democrat, but he proposed an amendment that would basically block any Smithsonian funding being used for the relocation. And it passed on a near unanimous voice vote with bipartisan support. There was a Republican and a Democrat on the committee. Both stood up after the guy that made the proposal made his remarks. Both of them said, yeah, we agree with this. We should vote in favor of this. My hope is that trend continues over the next few weeks, over the next few months, especially as the appropriation gets debated, that folks recognize that this really isn't a partisan issue. This is protecting the Smithsonian. It's a bipartisan institution. It's something that should have bipartisan support.
So I want to know what you guys think in the comments. I'm pretty honest about my opinion here. I really don't understand the point of this. I think that the Space Shuttle Discovery should stay where it's at the Smithsonian. But let me know in the comments. I'm curious to see if anyone actually supports this move of bringing it to Texas, or if you think that we can actually stop this. I mean, I just think it's a crazy thing that's even happening, but I also thought it was crazy when Jared Isaacman's nomination got pulled, so I guess there's always surprises coming. But I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.